Second part. The next day, Dan and Dee accompanied Doris when she went out to claim Dr. Feringo's body. They then paid a call on the sheriff and entrusted him with the remains before bringing all of Ray Ginsey and Greco's misdeeds to light. Having received a communique from the village of Pedros about the Frontier Defense Force, the sheriff had been out to the ruins himself and discovered the trio of lurid corpses there. Based on Doris's testimony, he concluded Ray Ginsey's gang was connected to the disappearance of the FDF patrol. In an attempt to ascertain the whereabouts of that patrol, special deputies rushed off to the neighboring villages. Well, Ray Ginsey won't be alert for long now. Of course, there's also a good chance he made like the wind last night right after you lopped off his cabbage collector. On the way back to the farm, Doris's expression was sunny. She had at least one of her problems taken care of. But Dee told her simply, if he becomes a noble, he could lose all his limbs and still be a threat. Ray Ginsey had ambitions of joining the nobility. Given his skill and scheming nature, to say nothing of a vindictiveness that put a serpent to shame, it was unthinkable that he would run off with his tail between his legs, or quit before he'd achieved his ends. He may have fled, but it was clear he'd hidden himself somewhere, and would be vigilantly watching what they did. He might still carry out the Count's orders. A daylight foe. Because of him, Dee's movements were greatly restricted. Up until now, he'd only had to worry about taking up his blade by night. But now, it would be patently impossible to go attack the Count in his castle and leave Doris and Dan under the scrutiny of an appreciable foe who possessed both weird weapons and even stranger skill. Still, it's too bad they didn't lock that bastard Greco up, Dan muttered. The sheriff was wrapped up in the Ray Ginsey case, but couldn't get to the bottom of Greco's activities. The three of them had accompanied the lawman to the mayor's house to question him, but the thoroughly disgusted mayor appeared and informed them that Greco had returned quite agitated the previous night, grabbed all the money in the house as well as the combat suit that had just come back from the repair shop, and took off on his horse. The sheriff had Doris and the others wait in his office while he checked with some of Greco's partners in crime, but they all said they didn't know where he was. Ray Ginsey and Greco. With the whereabouts of both of them unknown, there was little the sheriff could do. He informally sent Greco's description to the other villages and requested that if the man was found, he was to be detained for having important information about the murder of Dr. Feringo. But we can't charge him in this case, the sheriff told the visibly dissatisfied Doris. From what you tell me, it seems Doc was killed by this noble girl. And as for the matter of being turned into a vampire in the first place, well, even now it's not clear if a person suffers any harm when that happens. I wish the hell the capital would give us a clear ruling on that. Doris nodded reluctantly. It was unclear whether or not turning someone into a vampire could be considered murder. From one perspective, the change merely caused a shift in personality, not an absolute loss of life. The question dogged mankind throughout history, remaining undecided to this very day. Consequently, Greco couldn't be charged with the crime, even though he didn't inform the sheriff when he knew the Count was going to kill Dr. Feringo. Quite the contrary. In the eyes of the law, Greco might be considered a hero for rescuing you. Seeing Doris's slender eyebrows rise in wrath, the sheriff hurriedly added, and while I don't have any authority to get caught up in personal squabbles, the rest was implied. When I find the weasel, I'm gonna belt him good." Doris and Dan looked at each other and grinned. Doris found herself in the first peaceful lull since the Count had attacked her. There was a mountain of work to be done. Synthesized protein harvested by the robots had to be put into packages, stacked at the edge of the garden, and covered with a water-repellent tent until the traveling merchant made his monthly call. The Langs didn't sell it, but rather traded it for daily necessities. The protein Doris and Dan grew was well known for its density, and the merchant always gave them an exceptional rate in trade for it. The milking and general care of the cows had been neglected as well. Of course, the village of Ransilva was where most of that was traded. Even though she'd been shut out of all the shops, she couldn't let the cows go any longer. Doris's battle with the Count didn't put food on the table. With Dan and a battered robot to help her, the job would have taken 3 whole days, but Dee did it in half a day. He skillfully poured huge bowls of milky protein extract into plastic packages, and then carried them from the processing area to the garden when he had a pile of a certain size. The boxes weighed a good 70 pounds each, and he carried 3 of them at a time. When he first saw it, Dan bugged at his eyes and exclaimed, "Wow." But after 3 straight hours of this superhuman toting, his jaw dropped, and he was left speechless. The speed with which Dean milked the cows was almost miraculous. In the time it took Doris to do 1 cow, he did 3. And that was only using his left hand. His right hand was left empty to go for the sword by his side at any time. That was the way hunters were. I wonder what kind of family he comes from. It wasn't the first time this question had occurred to her, but it hadn't been answered in the days they'd been fighting, and even then Doris hadn't had the time to ask anyway. Actually, it was a code of the frontier that you didn't go poking into the background of travelers, and Dee's bearing in particular didn't invite questions. Doris watched Dee's profile with a distant look in her eyes as he silently worked one hand on the cow, the white fluid collecting in an aluminum-plated can. The scene seemed so familiar. Maybe it was the girl's feverish young heart that made her feel like it would go on like this forever. Well, it wasn't that long ago that Doris had lost her father, and her battle to protect her brother and the farm began. She suddenly realized how exhausted she was. "Done. Aren't you finished yet?" At Dee's query, Doris returned from her fantasies. No, I'm done here." As she stood up and pulled the can out from under the cow, she felt as if she was naked before him. "Your face is flushed. You coming down with a cold or something?" "No, it's not. It must just be the sunset." The interior of the barn was stained red. "I see. The Count will probably come here again. You'd best eat early and get down to bed." "I suppose you're right." Doris grabbed the handle of the can with both hands and carried it to one side of the barn. For some reason she had no strength. "Leave it. I'll carry it," Dee said, having seen how wobbly her legs were. "I'll be fine." Her tone was so rough she surprised herself. Tears rolled out with the words. Dropping the can to the ground, she ran out sobbing. As Dee went after her, though his casual pace hardly made it seem like pursuit, Dan trained an apprehensive gaze on him from the porch. "Sis ran around back crying. You two have a fight or something?" Dee shook his head. "No. Your sister's just worried about you." You know, Someone told me a man shouldn't make women cry. D shook his head. You're right. And smiled wryly. I'll go apologize. Taking a few steps, D then turned to Dan again. You still remember that promise you made, do you? Yep. You're 8 now. In another 5 years, you'll be stronger than your sister. Don't forget. Dan nodded. When he raised his face, it was shining with tears. Are you gonna go away, D? Once you've killed the Count, I mean? D disappeared around back without giving an answer. Doris was leaning against the fence. Her shoulders were quaking. Dee's footsteps didn't make a sound as he went and stood behind her. A cool breeze played through the grassy sea beyond the fence and through Doris's black tresses. You should go back to the house. Doris didn't reply, but after a bit she mumbled, I should have looked for someone else. Once you're gone, I won't be able to live like I did before. That milking can just now, I used to be able to carry 2 at a time. I won't be able to set Dan straight when he needs it, or have the strength to fend off any fellas who come out here courting me. But you're gonna go just the same. And that was the deal. That will end your sorrow. That or my death. She didn't know what she was protesting. No. Doris suddenly buried her face in his muscular chest. No, no, no. Nor did she know why she cried. Neither the young woman weeping, as if weeping could keep a phantom from vanishing, nor the young man with the melancholy air supporting her moved for the longest time. And then, after a little while, Doris lifted her face suddenly. Just above her head, Dee had started to growl softly. Doris was about to ask, "What is it?" when her head was forced back against his chest by his formidable strength. A few seconds more passed. The 2 silhouettes were fused in the red glow. But from between the 2 of them came the words, "I'm okay now," in a feverish voice. Nothing else was said. And soon Dee gently pushed Doris away and quickly walked back toward the house. As he rounded the corner of the barn, a voice said teasingly, "Why didn't you drink her blood?" It originated from around his waist. Shut up. For once, Dee's voice bore undisguised emotion. The girl knew. She knew what you wanted. Now don't you make that face with me. You can fight it all you like, but you've got the blood of the nobility in the marrow of your bones. The fact that when you fancy a woman you're more interested in latching onto her pale neck instead of getting her in the sack is proof of that. It was true. When Doris had bared her soul to him, and he felt her warm body sobbing against his chest, Dee's expression became the same lurid vampire visage he'd worn when he drank the blood of the midwich Medusas in the darkness of the subterranean aqueduct. But somehow, with his truly impressive willpower, he'd managed to fight the urge this time. As Dee kept walking, the voice said to him, "The girl saw your other face. Not just that, but I bet she smelled your breath as it brushed her neck. Smelled the scent of your cursed blood. And still she said she didn't mind. Go easy on the nice guy routine. You fight your own desire and deny the wishes of the girl. Is that any way for a grown dampier to act? You're always on the run, from your blood, from the people who want you. When you tell them you were fated to part, that's just dressing it up in a pretty excuse. Listen to me. Your father. Shut up. The words Dee said were the same as a moment earlier, but the eerie aura behind them made it plain this was far more than just a threat. The voice fell silent. Climbing the stairs to the porch, Dee turned a thoughtful gaze to the prairie and muttered, "Still, I've got to go. Go and find him." Page break. Oh shit. As Dee's hard gaze filled the lens's field of view, a shadowy figure hurriedly ducked, afraid that Dee would see him. But he forgot he was now on a hill a good 1,000 feet away. It was none other than the mayor's hell-raising son Greco, who most believed to have long since fled the village. He was wearing his combat suit. "That SOB gets to have all the fun," Greco said, slamming his electronic binoculars against the ground. The previous night, after deciding discretion was the better part of valor, he'd come up to the top of this hill and kept an eye on the farm. Lying flat on his belly, he reached over to his saddlebags and pulled the time-bewitching incense out from among the food and provisions packed in there. "Heh, you'll get yours once the sun's down. I'll use this baby to get you down crawling on the ground, then nail you with a stake. Then yours truly will take Doris by the hand and kiss this forsaken shithole goodbye," he said spitefully, turning his eyes toward the farm again. The previous night he'd been so scared by the Count and his werewolf that he'd abandoned all thought of killing them and decided to abduct Doris instead. And clearly, the person he talked about dispatching with a stake was Dee. "I wonder if it'll go as smoothly as all that." The words rained down on Greco in a cool voice. "What the?" Looking up, Greco saw a handsome young man sitting on a branch directly overhead. He wore an innocent smile, but his left arm was missing below the elbow, and its stump was wrapped in a bloody white cloth. He needed no introduction, and yet, less than 24 hours after losing one arm, he climbed up into a tree and scared the daylights out of Greco while looking no worse for wear, aside from a little darkness around his eyes. What strength he had, both physically and mentally. Regense got back down to the ground without making a sound. What the hell do you want?" "Don't play the innocent. I'm the rightful owner of that candle. Thanks to you, I lost my arm. I came out to the farm in the hopes of encountering the Count, but lo and behold, I've run across someone else of interest to me. So, are the three of them still hale and hearty?" His speech was refined, but Greco felt a crushing coercion in it that left him bobbing his head in agreement. "I suspected as much, in which case I shall have to score some quick points here, if I'm to be made one of them." After that enigmatic statement, the handsome young man addressed Greco with familiarity. "What do you say to joining forces with me? Work with you? From what I observed up in the tree, you seem obsessed with the young lady on the farm, yet her bodyguard remains an obstacle. I have another reason for wanting him out of the way. What say you?" Greco hesitated. Regense chided him. "Are you certain you can finish him, even with the candle and your combat suit? With your skill?" Greco was at a loss for an answer. That was exactly why he hadn't gone down and abducted Doris yet. Thanks to the effect it had on the Count's daughter, he'd been able to verify that time-bewitching incense was highly effective against pure vampires. But when it came to a half-human dhampir, he didn't have much confidence. He donned the combat suit, but since it was just back from the repair shop, he wasn't used to wearing it or using it. And if he had to call upon its power, it was doubtful he could use it to its full potential. You mean to say, if I hook up with you, we might be able to do this? His words were proof enough he'd fallen under Reagan's spell. Killing his smile, the handsome young man nodded. Indeed. Once the sun has set, I shall fight him. So watch for the right moment to light the candle, if you please. Should he leave himself open for even an instant, well, that's where my blades come in, he said, pointing to the stripe blades on his hip. Greco made up his mind. Sure. But what happens after that? After that? I know you're planning on handing the girl over to the Count. Well, that's exactly what I've been busting my hump to keep from happening. In that case, take her and flee, Reagan said casually. Seeing the now stupefied Greco, he added, I merely promised him I would save a Dampier. I don't care a whit whose property the girl becomes. That matter is between yourself and the Count, is it not? But you being a fellow human and all, if you like, I shall tell my compatriots scattered across the frontier to aid you in your flight from the Count. Would you really? Greco's tone had become an appeal. The question of how he could shake the pursuing noble if he managed to make good his escape with Doris was a point of concern for him. But why on earth would Reagan say such a thing to him? And because he wasn't sure that just getting the time-bewitching incense would be enough to beat D. The indescribable swordplay the hunter displayed as he made good his promise to dispatch 3 of the superhuman gang leader's valued henchmen in less than 15 seconds each, and the invincibility he demonstrated in getting to his feet again, despite the sword sticking out of his belly. The mere thought of these things was enough to give Reagan goose flesh. Just to be prepared for any eventuality, he decided to use the stupid little hood he'd found. Once D had been slain, Greco would have outlived his usefulness, and he would be crushed like an insect. Well, I believe we have a bargain then. Reagan flashed a smile so beautiful it would put a flower to shame, and held out his remaining hand. Okay. Greco hesitated to take his hand. But I don't completely trust you yet. Just so we're clear, if you try anything funny, I'll wreck the candle on the spot. Fair enough. Then that's just great. And they shared a firm handshake. Page break. The round moon rose, strangely large and white. The unsettling lunar disk sent wild waves of anxiety across the hearts of all who looked up at it. An old farmer named Morris snapped awake when he felt a chill. Sitting up in bed, the old man looked to the bedroom window and felt his hair rising on end. The window he was certain he'd locked was open now. But that wasn't what terrified the old man. His granddaughter Lucy, whom he looked after since she'd lost her parents in an accident, stood by the window in her little nightgown, staring at her grandfather with vacant eyes. Her face was paler than the moonlight spilling in through the window. Lucy, what's the matter? When he noticed the twin streaks of red coursing down his granddaughter's throat, the old man froze in his bed. I am Count Lee, Lucy mumbled, in a man's voice. Give me Doris Lang. If you do not, tonight, tomorrow night, every night the ranks of the living dead shall swell. And then his granddaughter collapsed on the floor. Second part, end.